Thank you. Today I'll talk about the authorization and the authentication system for Django I created. But on this talk, I won't talk about the Django memory. I'll talk about what authorization is or what a pyramid provide and so on. I'm not so good at a pyramid or authorization and or even talking English. So if I made a mistake or make a mislead, please forgive me and tell me later. Okay. So welcome to Japan. I really glad to meet you. And I live in the Saitama prefecture, next to the Tokyo. And yeah, I always be in around the Tokyo. So I'm really glad to you come from the Europe or America and really far from here. And I hope you enjoyed Japan and this event. And thanks for this awesome event. And thanks for chairperson and all of volunteer staff and all of attendees. And me, I use Django mainly so that I know well about the Django, but I'm not so good at a pyramid or a Plone. But I want to share knowledge beyond the frameworks. So I sometimes use a pyramid or some other web framework to learn some system or environment and so on from the other culture. Right. My name is Hiroki, and everybody call me KY. So please call me KY. And my website is on the hirokiky.org, or you can find my repository or my source codes in this GitHub account. It's same account name, hirokiky. Twitter is also the same name. And yeah, I'm the chairperson of the Django Congress JP. This is I think the biggest Django event in Japan, I think. And I'm working for Be Proud. This is the company name of me. I'm working for the company named Be Proud, and I'm creating the PyQ. This is the web service to learn the Python through the web. The PyQ is for mainly for Japanese people, and their all language is Japanese. But you can write some code, and you can run the Python code or test that code through the web. And why? As I said, I'm mainly using the Django, so there is no reason to use a pyramid basically, but it's really interesting framework, I think, and the architecture is really interesting, and the system of the authentication and the authorization is really cool, I think. So I think it comes from the Zope or Plone, basically, and the pyramid was created like them. And I learned way to use a pyramid and some repos utilities. So for example, I really like the repos.who, W-H-O. It was really nice, a whiskey middleware. So I'll talk about, at the first, I'll talk about the authentication and the authorization system of the pyramid a little bit. And I'll talk about some handling system of the Django's, the permission handling of Django. And finally, I'll talk about a library I created, which is for conducting the authorization system for Django. All right. This is a requirements text for this talk. You don't need this talk won't require you that Django's knowledge or Django's experiment. So if you know about a little bit about the web or a little bit about authentication and authorization, so it's fine. All right. There are two words really hard to distinguish. The left side is authentication and the right side is the authorization. Um, this is hard to notice. It means authentication, and authorization. It's short word for these words, and these are really hard to distinguish even in Japanese. In Japanese, the ninsho means authentication, and ninka is authorization. So even in English and Japanese, they are really hard to distinguish, but it's not so hard to think. So what is the authentication? Authentication is to recognize who you are. So for example, user login or logout or user object and the session handling, extracting user data from the session and so on is authentication. It's quite really easy. And authorization is what system to recognize what you can. So basically, if people say that permission, it means authorization basically. And sometimes people make a misunderstanding between the authentication and the authorization. So for example, OAuth 2 is for the authentication, not for authorization. But partly it provides some scope or something. So it including authorization a little bit, it's a little bit hard. But simply, for example, if you go to so for example, reception of the hotel room. So if you show some passport or a ticket or some ID card, so the reception staff will say, "Oh, you are Hiroki-san. Welcome to this hotel." Blah blah blah. It means authentication. And authorization is to allow something to you. So for example, Hiroki-san, you registered this room, so you can stay in the 201 room. So this is the authorization. Or even you can go to the private pub, you can go to the private beach, but you can't use private pool, or you can't use private garden, and so on. This handling is authorization. Right. And I talk about the great things of the pyramid. I talk about the pyramid security. And there is the authentication policy and authorization policy in the pyramid. So you can change the way to do it, way to handle authentication or handle authorization in pyramid. So these two classes are for doing each authentication and authorization. So the ticket authentication policy is for the authentication, to do authentication. And the ACL authorization policy is for doing authorization. And you can change the core system to recognize users and so on. So authentication policy is for detect users and or extract principals from request. So while reading the document of pyramid, we can find the words principles. It's a little bit hard to recognize, and I was really surprised what this word, but I'll explain later. Anyway, so the authentication policy to a class to implement how a pyramid remember users, like login, and how forget users, so like to log out, or how to extract users' data from, for example, request.session, and getting the user ID from the session, and getting the user object from the database, and handle the user object as a logged in information, like as a principal. Okay, so then you also you can set the authorization policy. So authorization policy is for allow to distinguish allow or deny from context and principles and permissions. So there are three words. It's really too abstract, so it's a little bit hard. So sometimes some of my friends sometimes say the pyramid is so difficult, but because I think the pyramid is really well created and a little bit like abstract thing, so it's a little bit hard to recognize, but it's cool. And I think the pyramid was created by really genius people or aliens. It's really cool. But anyway, the principle is, in easy word, it's just authenticated information. So it's not hard things. So for example, logged in user or logged in user ID as a string or a group the logged in user belonging to, like a group owners and so on. So you can set multiple principles as a string. I think mainly you should set as a string, but I think you can set the user object or even tuple and so on. And the context is a target object, and permission is some verbs you want to do. All right. So I mean the principal is like a logged in user, like a me, Hiroki, or a context is an article. So for example, which ID is 1, and permission is to like edit the article or view the article or delete article and so on. So I said 3 words, but it can recognize, so for example, can Hiroki edit the article? So the Hiroki means principles, and edit is permission, the requested, and the article is the article is the context. So the authorization policy should distinguish allowing or denying from this for this question. So for example, request will access to the article edit URL, so the authentication policy will recognize the user from the session and set each principles. And next turn, the authorization policy should allow or deny to answer this question. So the request want to access to the article edit view. So that this is Hiroki-san, and Hiroki-san want to edit and this article. So authorization policy will think yes or no. Will say yes or no. So I created this kind of the business figure. It's not the whole feature of each policy, so it can make the misleading. But anyway, so the authentication policy will recognize principles from the request, like this user accessed or the user ID this was this, and the user is belonging to the group owner and so on. And the authentication policy can set each principle as string or object and so on. And on the other hand, the context object, in this case the article object, was the extracted and detected by its path. And so if you use a traversal system, and the pyramid can get the data from some database or data store or even ZODB. And so article/1 means this article is binded. So the request.path can conduct the context, the article object. And in this case, the view function requires edit permission. So there are three things. There are principles, there are context, there are permissions. So the request can do this action or no. So that then authorization policy will detect allowing or denying. So I think this system is so cool because each policies are totally separated. So you can change the only authentication policy, or you can change in the authorization policy and so on. It's so cool. And so if you coding hardly inside your system, you can't change authentication policy. So, but in this case, so for example, if you can separate the server to return the principals, so if you create the separate, even you create the separate servers, you can collaborate each other. So for example, the servers will return just a JSON object or JSON array, including strings. And if the separated authentication server will return user ID and a group owner and so on. So it can be principal directly and so on. You can write your each own authentication policy like that. It's so cool. And something I like more on I like this ACL too. ACL stands for the access control list. And so if you use the ACL authorization policy, and if you write this kind of method, you can write the mechanism to distinguish allow or denying the permissions. So in this case, the article can view for everyone, and the article can only edited by an owner. It means so, and the first element of the ACL is action. I mean allow or deny, and the second one is the principal. The principal that request including, and third one is required permission. So this is declarative and really easy to read, and it's powerful. And in each view, you can just write some context for corresponding to this view and the required permission. And so each context is determined by the request path, as I said. And if you require some edit permission for this article edit, you can just write a permission called edit. So, and the ACL, the access control list, will determine the request can do the action or not. So the why ACL is nice. So there isn't a dynamic data of permission. So for example, the user can edit the article as one row of database. It's dynamic data, dynamic permission data, I said. But on this approach, it's hard to change the mechanism to each user should have each permission. And the second one, the authorization with data not only for user. For example, if you using IP address as a principal, you can write some code. You can use the IP address or some remote user value as this principal. It's so nice, and it's really like declarative, so that easy to read. It's so nice. Okay, so I'll talk about Django's way of to handle the permissions. So I think it's not enough. The Django has a authentication mechanism or authentication system inside its framework by default. And so you can create some view to log in or log out so easily. And you can write this kind of view function to avoid to not to allow the anonymous to access this view. by a decorator and so on. Okay, so but handling the permission in the Django is more like a dynamic way. So you should insert a raw data into some table, permissions table. So if you allow the user to change some blog post or some article table, you need to add some data to your user. So Django took this dynamic permission way, and you can change the permission from the admin side provided by Django. So it's nice, but I think it's not enough. And you can use this permission decorator, and on this case, the change this view can be accessed by a user. If the user having the change blog post permission data. So I don't want to save the permission as a data. And this system can be only used between the users and the models. Models is a table or some data, I meant. And it's a little bit hard to migrate if they change the mechanism to to make the user, I forgot the English word. So it's a little bit hard to handle if you change so the user can access blog posts and so on. But if you change the rule, change the condition, you need to change all of data already saved. It's really hard. So you need a data migration. I don't like this approach. So most of my friends won't use the Django's permission system, sadly. People are using this system, but it's partly used or not so mainly used. So people will create their own view decorator for authorization to do permission things like this. So in this case, there's some guy wrote some MyApp security module, and in this the function now there is a decorator named my subscription required and so on. And so for instance, you can apply the decorator, and you can set some plan or some role and so on as a first argument. So a decorator will recognize the user's role or user subscription and detect allow or deny. So it's okay, but there should be a better way, I think. So I created the library to do handling the permission in better way. So when you use the Django keeper, you can write the ACL method. Oh, we saw this method. It's like a pyramid's ACL authorization style. And you can write ACL mostly same as the pyramid's ACL authorization way. So you can write allow everyone view. So that all article can be read by all of people. And each article can be edited by only author users. So there is an author in that model, and it's foreign key to the logged in user. And if the user is user self.author, you can edit it. So it's so simple. And you can write some decorator. You can use the keeper decorator. And the first, you should set the arguments. The first argument is the permission you want to require. And the second is the context. So what kind of model belonging or corresponding to the view. And you need to write a little bit function to get each models. In this case, the functions arguments are the same as the view functions arguments. So it will take the request and article ID, and you should return a dictionary for conduct how each model should be taken. So in this case, the keeper decorator should take the article which has the ID is the second argument article ID. All right, so I created something for Django, which can use the ACL and the view decorator. So ACL, you should write allow or deny, and the target user who and the permission. And the keeper decorator is will do authorization and the data fetching. So this is the data replacement of principles. So I described the principles of pyramid, but I thought the system is too complex for Django. So I just created some callable, and we can set the callables as the second element of each ACL. So in this case, it means that if request user is self.author, the author of the article, so the request can edit it. And the second, the function is just a callable which takes a request object as first argument and will return the bool value. The bool value is the true or false that accept or no, allow or deny. So, so for example, the IsUser operator, I called this function as an operator. Operator is the function like this, callable object, so that it's totally same implementation in the library, but it takes a user object and the callable take a request, and with the callable will check the request.user. So Django will add this request.user argument, attribute by default a system, and the callable will check the user is the author or no. So it's really easy. But there's a problem, so that I created this operator approach, but it can't separate the authentication policy as a principles. But Django has a default Django contrib auth program, so I use this little bit more and more a hard-coded way. And sometimes additional querying may happen on request processing, like while checking the user is the request.user. In this case, any other additional query won't happen, but sometimes can be happen. So the replacement of context of pyramid is the same way. I write the keeper will take some corresponding object for each view or each request or each URL path. And I wrote some template function to handle the permission. And you can also change the error handling. So if you want, sometimes if you don't want to raise a 4 or 3 error, so for example, like GitHub's repository page, if you don't have the access permission to some GitHub repository, it will return not found. So they want to hide the existence of private repository. So you can change the error actions. All right, so and you can specify also the root context for all of views, and you can use some with class-based views. In these days, Django provides a way to write some view function as a classes, so I supported this one, and I wrote some code for in this measure de facto REST API library for Django. It named Django REST Framework, and you can use some Django Keeper with Django REST Framework too. All right, this is not, the Django Keeper is not just for a toy project, not hobby project. I'm using on my production code. So if you find some bug or security issue, please tell me before tell others. So as I said, I'm creating some production. The name is PyQ, PYQ, is the platform to learn the Python through the web. And you can write some code, Python code, and you can run on the browser. The PyQ will launch a new container inside it and run each user's codes. And also there is some courses to learn. So there are really hard handling of permissions, like each user have subscription plan, and the users are two variety. So the first one is a personal user, personal learner, and the second one is a business teams. And for each members of teams has other roles, like a member or leader. Leader is some teaching assistant, and the owners of each project or team, and so on. So there are really complex some attributes to distinguish, allow this action or deny this action, and so on. So I wrote some code by writing decorators or if sentences or condition checking, and the code was like a spaghetti, and I created a Django keeper. And nowadays it's a little bit I hide some codes, but if something public, it will return the first ACL and the second ACL and so on. It's switching the ACL, and if the request has this attribute, so the user will have the learn permission, and if the user, the team user, it will have the view, learn, edit, and so on. I created this one, and it will work fine. How about it? Yeah, it was easy to handle permission and easy to change the authorization. If I want to change some permission to set to each request, I can just change this ACL. So I don't need to change the view functions or templates, the HTML and so on. It's quite really nice. So as a conclusion, the pyramid has really interesting security system, and Django's basic permission handling is not enough for me. And I learned a lot of things from the other web framework, and I created a Django keeper and learned from other framework, conducted a nice library to the Django, and it makes nicer life for me. So if you have a chance to go to the other web conference, or if you have a chance to try as a web framework, please try it. And if you won't use this framework or library in production, it's a great way to get some inspired and create your library. You can steal the idea. So that's all, folks. Thank you. I'm Hiroki Kiyohara, and there's a GitHub project on me. Thank you for listening.
Are there any questions? On your pyq.org website, how do you run Python? You emulate it in a sandbox, or do you run it on?
All right. Your question is about the PyQ. All right.
Yes, yes.
PyQ is will launch some sandbox. Do I have some time? Yep. All right. It's not. All right. It's not advertising with the PyQ anyway. All right. So if you access to pyq.jp, it's really nice project. So I access to some interesting content. Right. So I forgot that. Okay, so this is for learn the way to use the Django. And all right, if you write some code here, and this notice say that you should write some code in here and so on, and you can you can run the Django's process, and you can access through the browser, and you can use this one and so on, and it actually works. Actual Django process is running inside the container. It's totally separated sandbox environment.
It's a Docker.
It's Docker, created by Docker.
Okay. Thank you.
Back to Keeper for me. How do you handle list views? Because you might want to show a list of projects that you have access to.
All right. So as I said, there are root contexts. So if you want to handle the permission of the user can access the view or not, you can use the root context to write the ACL for all of users. But there's a problem. So for example, so in the list view, sometimes you shouldn't list all of objects, and you need to filter by the permission. It's quite really hard work, and now Django Keeper doesn't have that mechanism. It's so hard.
Yeah, the list views I find really difficult. I was hoping maybe you'd fix that as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, so thank you, Hiroki.